Well, welcome again, everybody, and for those of you who are watching online, welcome to you as well. We believe it's no accident that you're here, and God's going to speak to you in a new way today. And as you know, we're in the middle of a series. Maybe some of you know, maybe some of you don't. We're in the middle of a series on faith in the movies, and you say, what's different from every other week? I do movie clips every week, and that's true. But I'd like to focus a little bit more in on these films in particular, because they help us understand our life and faith in a very real way. And so far, we've had nothing but true stories. We're going to continue with that this week, and then next week we're going to go into something completely different in terms of true stories. But that doesn't change the truth behind the stories. But before I get to the clip today, I just want to tell you a little story about myself. It's just sort of a way of getting into this. And maybe some of you have heard this story before. If you have, I apologize. It's about my first day in seminary, my very first day in seminary. And I will tell you that it was a day that was a long time in the making. I can remember as just a little boy, 4 or 5 years old, watching the pastors that were a part of my congregation, Morningside Lutheran in Sioux City. And from time to time, I would think, man, that might be something I'd like to do. Those thoughts would come and go. From the time I was very young, I had people like Palmer Wold, and some of you know Jim Carpenter, Jim Bjorky, Don Sarf. That's just to name a few. We had a bunch of pastors while I was there, and all of them just sort of touched me in a way that, and maybe urged me a little bit to think, well, maybe this is something I ought to think about. Well, that conversation was always in the back of my head, and I never spoke it aloud until about the last 2 years of my college career, and I started saying it aloud a few times. And then finally, the big day came. I had been accepted to seminary, and I packed up my car, my little green Pinto wagon, complete with a briefcase that my dear wife Jill had given me. She wasn't my wife at the time. She gave me an American Tourister hard-sided briefcase. It was the bomb. And I will tell you that I looked the part, or I thought I did anyway. And so I got in the car, kissed her goodbye, and drove north, and man, I was ready to go until I got there. The first thing on the schedule for everyone, not just the newbies, was an all-school picnic, an all-seminary picnic. They had it out on the front lawn of Luther Seminary. And so they had a couple of long tables set up with all kinds of goodies, and people were gathering when I got there, and I got out of the car, and I went over, and I grabbed a plate and started going through line. And the folks were everywhere. They were sort of clustered in little groups, and I noticed all the guys had beards and little glasses, every one of them. And they were in groups, and they were talking. It seemed like everybody knew everybody else. I didn't know a single soul. I had no idea what I was getting myself into or with whom. So I decided, I grabbed the plate, and I started edging into one of the groups. And didn't feel like I was too welcome, so I kind of made my way out of that one and tried to edge my way into another group. And then I started listening to pieces of the conversation, which included multisyllabic theological terms that I had never heard before. Okay, guys, this is a picnic. I thought it was supposed to be an informal affair with informal conversation, more like, hey, how are you? What's your name? My name's Dave. I'm from Sioux City. Tell me about yourself. No. We were already into the finer points of realized eschatology. And it took me about 10 minutes to come to the realization that I didn't have a beard and I didn't have little glasses. I could probably fix both of those, but there were some things I was not fixing. And I mean, I was just in way over my head, and I knew that I was probably the dumbest person on that lawn. The walls just started going up all over me. I was on one side by myself, and everybody else was over on the other side of those walls. And so I did the only thing I could do. I calmly set down my plate. I went into the main building, I found the bathroom, and I lost my lunch. You ever feel that way? Ever feel like, you want to be there, but you don't belong? That you're not quite this, or you're not enough of that, and you're pretty sure people are looking at you and wondering who in the world let this person get this far into it. And it's just like wall after wall after wall. Well, I thought about that as I thought about what we're going to do today and this movie that we're talking about, a movie called Hidden Figures, which, once again, I say it every week, right? If you haven't seen it, this is one you really should see. It's a true story about 3 black women who work for NASA in the space race during the 1960s. And so let's just, Shelley, if you would, let's just watch the first clip. So that's Mary Jackson. There are 2 other women involved in the story. The movie weaves between the stories of these 3 women. The other one was Dorothy Vaughan, and then Catherine Goebel, who's kind of the main star of the movie. But I wanted to show you this clip because it's so very poignant. I mean, my little experience at seminary pales in comparison to the walls that these people have to face. Their job description at NASA is to be a computer, which means that they are there to make calculations and do the math for the real movers and shakers in NASA. A computer. That's their job title. But even that, it sounds more like they're a thing than a person. And so there's Mary Jackson, and she's been assigned to this new boss permanently. He's asked for her, and she is born to be an engineer. And the head engineer sees this, and he challenges her to think differently, to think bigger, to become that which she's meant to be. But there's a real world out there, a world of walls. He's the exception to the rule. Everybody else in NASA doesn't see things the way he does. That's because he's had to live with a few walls of his own, as he mentioned. A Polish Jew, parents killed in death camps. But the rest of the world, they're stuck, the rest of NASA, stuck in 1961, where there are separate bathrooms, and there are separate coffee pots, and there are even separate buildings. The place where the colored computers worked was the West Campus, far away from where all the rest of the action was taking place. They just cloistered them. And so Mary's boss says, let's dream bigger. Let's think bigger. You are who you are. You have these gifts. Let's explore that. And she says, you know what? There's a real world out there with real ways and real walls. See, even she's had to buy into it. The people who make the walls make them real, and the people who live with the walls make them real. And so she can't even begin to dare to dream something that to her looks impossible. Let's stop there and sing for a minute. So that brings us to the story that Carol read, and actually the first of two Bible stories that I'd like to put in front of you today. But let's take them one at a time, and Carol's story first. It's a parable that Jesus tells, a story that Jesus tells, and he's telling his disciples. And it's a story about the power of prayer and the way prayer can change the world around us. Is really what it's about. And so there are two characters in this story. First, there is this judge who, as Jesus says, he has no time for God. He has no time for people, no respect for anyone. He just is who he is, and he makes decisions, and he doesn't care who he runs over or what anyone else thinks. And then the second character in this story is a widow who is seeking righteousness. Now, did you hear that? She's a widow. Remember from a couple of weeks ago, we did the story of the woman in the well? Same applies here. She's a woman, which means that she has no standing in this society, and she's a widow, which means that she's not attached to a man. And if you're a woman in that society, not attached to a man, you are nothing. And so she goes to this judge who doesn't care even what men think or God thinks, let alone this woman, and she pleads her case, and she asks for righteousness. She asks for justice. And you can just hear the judge. I mean, she keeps coming back. He keeps denying her request, and you can just hear him say, "You're a woman. Why in the world would I ever listen to you? I tell you what, why don't you go get your husband and have him come? Maybe I'll listen to him." "Oh, that's right. You don't have a husband. Too bad." She knows the walls well. And she keeps coming, and she keeps coming, and she keeps coming until finally she wears him down. "I'm tired of listening to her. I'm just going to give her what she wants." And the woman receives her due. And then Jesus says, the kingdom of God is just like that. Because you see, according to Jesus, I don't care what the world says you are or who the world says you are. Remember what God has made you. You are his child, created in his image. And he has claimed you and made you his own. Never forget that. Because you live in a world that's going to tell you all kinds of lies and build all kinds of walls all around you. But that is not who you are. Pursue who you are. Insist upon it. Pray for it. Drive for it. And do not give up in this world until you can claim it as your own. And as you do, God will use you to change the world around you. And Jesus says the kingdom of God is just like that. Well, that leads me to a second story. Because evidently, when Jesus tells these stories, people listen to them. And there is this woman who has been hanging around Jesus, evidently. And she starts to hear herself in a story like that. And she's a woman, right? She's not a Jew. She's a Canaanite of Syrophoenician descent, which means that she's an outsider. And she has a daughter who is possessed by an unclean spirit. Wall, wall, wall. And she comes to Jesus because, she's been listening. And she knows who she is. She knows what the world tells her what she is. But because of who she is as a child of God, she also knows that those things are a lie. And she comes to Jesus and she says to Jesus, and she does not stop. She is relentless. God has put a vision in front of her, and she is going to pursue that vision no matter what the cost. She comes to Jesus, and she does not leave him alone. And Jesus is frankly a little surprising here. He has to learn a bit himself, evidently. My daughter has an evil spirit. Help me, Lord. And Jesus meets her with silence. Doesn't say a word to her. And then the disciples look at her. They look at her like the astronaut or the astronaut corps at NASA looks at Catherine Goebel, like she's just walked into a room where she shouldn't be. And they're disgusted with her. They're rumbling among themselves, why in the world is she here? She doesn't belong here. And she tells Jesus that, send her away, Jesus. And finally, Jesus says, you know what, hon? I didn't come for you. Not here for you. She comes at him again. Help me, Lord. Jesus replied, why should I take the children's bread meant for the Jewish people and throw it to you, one of the dogs? Well, that ought to close the door. Not for someone who knows who she is and is rabidly persistent in pursuing and claiming what already belongs to her. That may be, Jesus, she says, but you know, even the dogs eat the crumbs from the master's table. Do not let the world tell you who you are or where you belong or why you don't count. Because God has a different plan for you. And as you insist upon those things, it changes you and it changes the world around you. Let's sing. So let me say this again, just because it is so important. We start with a God who loves you. Do not start with what you see with your eyes and hear with your ears and know with your senses. Start with real things, with the God who loves you so much that he has decided that your life is more important than his life. Got that? Because the rest of the world is going to, as I said a few minutes ago, is going to just tell you lie after lie after lie. It's going to tell you you're not good enough, you're not bright enough, you're not pretty enough, you're not athletic enough, you're not this, you're not that. It's going to tell you that there are limitations to your life. Limitations even like sickness and death. It's going to tell you that things can't be changed in the world. That person with which you've had a disagreement over all those years, that disagreement is never going away. By the way, have you listened to what's been going on in Washington? I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat. Have you been listening to this? This thing is so entrenched that all the commentators, right, left, and in the middle, they've all said this is hopeless. There is no changing this kind of divide. And some want to blame this side, and others want to blame that side, but everybody agrees on one thing. There are some things in the world you can't change. The world is as it is. The walls are up, and we have to live with them. Don't believe it. Not for a second. And then insist upon what you already know to be true, that defies all the lies of this world. Pray for it. Insist upon it. Pursue it passionately. And it will change you, and it will change the world around you. Okay, so you've already met Mary Jackson. I'd like you now to meet Catherine Goebel. She is a brilliant mathematician who, because of her color, is assigned to check other people's numbers. What she will become is the person in NASA who invents the math that before she comes along doesn't exist. The math that will take a spaceship out of orbit and bring it safely back to Earth. But she doesn't get to that place by simply leaving the world the way it is. Watch. Okay, there's a really good line at the end of that I didn't show you. Watch the movie, you'll see why. Okay, but you get the point, right? Catherine Goebel knew who she was. She was frustrated with the walls, and she decided finally she's not going to live with them anymore. And so she insisted upon them. She insisted on people seeing her for what she was. And she pursued it. And she made it her own. And by the way, did you notice that when it's all said and done, who tears down the walls? She didn't just change herself, she changed the world around her. My friends, if I have one message for you today, as an individual and as a congregation, be who you are. And insist that the rest of the world see you for what you are, not for what they want to make you out to be. Insist upon it. Pursue it. Because it is truth. Everything else is a lie. And know that as you do, inch by inch and step by step, God will use that insistence to change the very people and the very things in your life that you thought were unchangeable. And for that we give him thanks and praise.